Hi, I'm Lucas,
And I'm Brian.
and this is the Quax Podcast.
Hey, everyone, and welcome to this week's podcast. We have a special guest today named Grant Genereux. Now, I was introduced to Grant's blog back in October of last year when I was reading about vitamin D, vitamin A, and their connection to autoimmune disease. See, I have an autoimmune disease. I have type 1 diabetes, so I am always doing research into new treatments and new possible explanations that can really make my life easier. Now, Grant puts forth a fascinating theory that basically vitamin A, as we know it, is not a vitamin, but a poison. Now, when I first heard this, I thought, this is absolutely nuts. Vitamin A and its role in bodily functions, it's been studied since its discovery back in the 1900s. But Grant was getting some amazing results with his autoimmune eczema by cutting out vitamin A from his diet. Not only that, other people with autoimmune conditions were attempting it and having similar miraculous stories. So when I saw the results that people were getting, I obviously wanted to try it, and I started the diet back around December, I think. Now, it's not an easy diet. It is quite restrictive, but my personal results have been nothing short of really amazing for my life. So to give you a quick rundown, the biggest difference for me has been mental. Now, after just a few weeks on the diet, I felt like an invisible blanket had been lifted from my mind. Now, this was back in January of this year, 2019. And this podcast was started in February. This podcast is very much a product of the explosion in creativity that I experienced at that time. I had no idea that my mind had been basically running without all the cylinders going for possibly years. Now, after being on this diet for a couple months, I started to run into what the community has been calling detox symptoms. The theory being that as you go on a low vitamin A diet, your body releases vitamin A from the liver and fat storage, and you get this basket of symptoms that are associated with high amounts of vitamin A. Now, for me, it was asthma. I've never had asthma in my life, but I started having trouble breathing, and I would chronically cough up phlegm from my lungs. Now, this also coincided with a period of getting a lot more sunlight, and some people say, more sunlight, more vitamin D makes you detox more vitamin A. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what some people say. So at the time, I went to several doctors. I got a chest x-ray. I had blood tests. All showed that I was healthy and nothing was going on. I tried many different supplements, I tried a few drugs, and I finally found that inhaling glutathione on a daily basis was the only thing that completely resolved my asthma symptoms. The doctors, they wanted me to go with an inhaled steroid, but, long term, I think steroids can have disastrous consequences. Although, the doctors assured me that, they were perfectly safe, I just didn't really believe them. Now, I've always wanted to detail this story about vitamin A, but I wanted you all to hear it from Grant himself, not just me. So before we jump into the interview, you need to know a few things. So first, vitamin A has several different forms, but the interview mainly talks about them all as just vitamin A. So first, there's beta-carotene, which you probably know about from the orange color in carrots. Beta-carotene is found in many colorful fruits, actually, and vegetables, and your body will convert beta-carotene into the active form of vitamin A. Now, this group of compounds, they're often referred to as carotenoids. The next type of vitamin A is vitamin A itself, which is called retinol, and this is found in liver, eggs, butter, other animal sources, but generally not found in fruits and vegetables. Now, retinol, it comes in different forms like retinol palmitate, and these all are often referred to as retinoids. Lastly, we talk about something called retinoic acid, which is an acidic form of retinol. Now, according to Grant, this is the baddest of the bad in the vitamin A world. If you have heard about Accutane, the drug for acne, it has some horrific side effects. That's basically retinoic acid. There's also some chemotherapy drugs that are very similar to retinoic acid. So retinoic acid, or RA for short, it's some powerful, badass stuff. So to sum it up, there's carotenoids from plants, there's retinoids from animals, and then there's the chemotherapy-esque retinoic acid. And all of these are basically lumped under the overarching term vitamin A. You got it? Now, Grant has been doing a no vitamin A diet for 5 years now. He has an amazing story of getting diagnosed with kidney disease, autoimmune eczema, and being given 3 to 5 years to live, and then recovering from those conditions through this no vitamin A diet. He's written 3 books on the subject, which he gives away for free, and he also writes periodic updates on his blog at ggeneroux.blog. Now, I'll link to all these in the show notes. During the interview, at around the 20-minute mark, the call is dropped, but we get right back into it. I also want to warn you that the research Grant talks about can get a little complex, but it is important to establish that the original research around vitamin A, being an actual vitamin, has some serious flaws. So please join me in welcoming Grant to the podcast. Hello, Grant, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for coming on and giving us the time to do this. Now, this is really exciting for me because I've been following your work since I think around October, and I've implemented some of your ideas and had really great results. So I've been really kind of chomping at the bit to get a chance to talk with you and get some of your ideas just straight from the source.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep. So why don't we start off by maybe you giving us a bit on your background and how you became interested in health?
Sure. So my background, professionally trained as a civil engineer, so structural engineering. And then due to kind of economic constraints here in Western Canada, I moved into geology and spent a number of years doing geology, oil and gas related geology. And then from there, got more interested in the emerging computer science sector. And so I moved into that area of technology. So my background is really one of based in technology and science. And I had no interest in the health sector whatsoever until like so many other people, I ended up getting sick and didn't kind of understand what was happening to me, and just kind of started to investigate it from there.
Yeah, you've had some health issues in the past. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I was in generally pretty good health for most of my life. Nothing to complain about. Other than kind of in my early 40s, mid 40s, I started to develop a lot of joint pain in my knees, particularly. And just body stiffness. And I just kind of assumed, okay, that's just what happens when you get older. Then kind of very surprisingly, I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease in 2006. And
How old were you around then?
So I was 46 then, which was, very surprising. Even my nephrologist thought it's, very surprising. You're too young to have kidney disease. You don't understand what's going on with you, but you do. And so, I kind of took that in stride. Nothing I could do about it. So it was just kind of, it is what it was. It is what it was. And I didn't think at all, I was going to be able to do anything about that. So I kind of just went on with that. And then, by 2013, I ended up having an episode or moved into this state of having incredibly bad chronic fatigue, kind of hard to describe. And so I was actually forced to quit my job. There was just no way I was going to be able to work in that kind of condition. And I kind of assumed that was kind of the early end stage of chronic kidney disease. And I kind of had checked out of the medical sector just for a very peculiar little reason.
What reason was that, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, I did write about it on one of my blog posts. My nephrologist told me about a study that they had conducted with kidney patients. And, I was just floored by what I heard. And I thought, holy smokes, if I just couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I just decided, I'm not going to have anything to do with you guys, and see you later. And so I just decided I'm just going to let nature take its course with me. And lots of people die from kidney disease, and so so be it, right? It's not great, but move on.
So the doctor basically told you, you have kidney disease, and there's really not much you can do about it, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So I was actually told, I was given kind of a time frame to kind of expect how things would progress and decline, and there's nothing you can do about it, and it's terminal. And so,
what was that timeline?
Well, the timeline was about kind of, it was going to vary, of course. It wasn't really specific, but
Yeah.
it was a very rigorous amount of testing that they had done and determined based on my increasing rates of protein loss in my kidneys that it was probably somewhere between 3 and 5 years. And but he told me to expect to be on dialysis within, I think he said 2 or 3 years, and then 2 years on dialysis, and then that's pretty much the end game after that.
So you're pretty much 46 years old, and they're telling you, you probably aren't going to make it past 51 or so.
Yeah, that's right. And you know what? I wasn't. It's kind of strange. That's, of course, that's bad news, but I wasn't too kind of upset by it. It's kind of a strange thing to say, but
that is a little strange.
The way I kind of look at it, lots of kids get kidney disease and other chronic diseases. So I figured, okay, I've gone this far, pretty healthy life all along, and this is really bad news, but wasn't at all feeling sorry for myself. This happens in life, right?
Yeah.
So, but based on some of the other information that he given me, just kind of incidentally, I decided I'm not going to have anything to do with these guys, and basically I kind of checked out of the medical sector and didn't even bother going back for follow-up checkups or anything else. And
So how did you then make your way from this point of being like, I'm checking out of the medical sector, I'm not going to listen to them anymore? How did you then get to this potential discovery, about vitamin A?
Sure. So I guess I was really more upset with the nephrologist and the studies that they were doing. I wasn't anti-medical sector or anything else, or anti-doctor. I still had my GP and had a good relationship with him, gone for my regular checkups. And so everything was, it was just, I wasn't going to treat myself or attempt to follow any of their treatment advice for kidney disease or go on dialysis. So that's kind of that part of it.
Gotcha.
But so in 2013, I had encountered, the fall of 2013, encountered this chronic severe fatigue, and kind of was unable to work, and went along, with that for about, I guess about 4 or 5 months. And then very incidentally, started to try to, improve my overall health by eating healthy. And so I really kind of ramped up on my, quote, healthy foods, and ended up getting sicker and sicker. And what happened was, it was really kind of funny. One evening, my wife made this plate of, this dish of stewed tomatoes, and I had an entire plate. It wasn't really that much, but, 10 or 12 ounces of these stewed tomatoes. And I had no eczema, no rash before that. My skin was starting to develop this little kind of grainy texture to it, almost like these little grains of sand underneath my skin. I was getting a little bumpy, but not a rash, nothing severe. So the morning after that, when I got up, I had absolute head to toe massive rash, which I thought was just a rash.
Wow.
And took me a few days to get in to see my GP, my general practitioner, and then once I got in to see him, very carefully, along with another doctor, I was diagnosed with adult eczema, or eczema as we pronounce it here in Canada. And he told me, okay, you're going to have this for you, the rest of your life, and it's only going to get worse. And I'll give you some steroid creams to deal with it, which was a little bit ridiculous because it's a little tiny tube of steroid cream, and this rash is covering me from head to toe.
Wow.
I just thought, that's ridiculous. But at that time, I said to him, look, this is obviously a poisoning because I ate these tomatoes, and the morning after I get this big rash. And he said, nah, that's a nice idea, but that's not the case. You've this autoimmune disease. And I had no idea about autoimmune diseases or anything else at that point in time. And so he sent me home, and so at that time, what I did was, like what anyone else would do, is say, well, I need to know more about this eczema because I have no idea what the hell this is about. And I just got on the internet, started, searching up, what other people are doing for trying to treat it or trying to, kind of ease the symptoms of it. Because it is a pretty brutal, nasty condition if you haven't experienced it.
So just to sum up, basically, you went
Sure.
to the doctor, they diagnosed you with autoimmune eczema, and
Right.
you're thinking it's coming from these tomatoes. They're saying no, and they're giving you a little tube of cream to treat it. But they didn't really give you any other options, did they?
No, they didn't, and it kind of follow up with anyway. So what I did from there was started looking at just getting more information about this new disease, and one of the things that caught my attention right away was all these forums and even the official websites like the American Eczema Association one in like New Zealand or Australia. They're all talking about trigger foods. So you have to find your trigger foods that flare up your condition. And I thought, well, that's really strange because I was just told that this is an autoimmune disease, and now I have to look out for these trigger foods. And I thought that just doesn't square with me. Why is there trigger foods?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought, oh, okay, that's pretty peculiar. And then what I did was one of the trigger foods that almost everybody talked about, both on forums and official medical websites, was the correlation between milk and eczema. So it's clearly one of the trigger foods, and a lot of people kind of identify it with making their condition get worse. And so I kind of thought, well, what the hell's in milk? How could that be? And kind of leading up to that state in my health, or decline in my health, I had actually ramped up on drinking a lot of milk, thinking it was going to be beneficial to me.
Oh,
so here I'm thinking, okay, I've just for the last 4 or 5 months drinking a lot more milk than I've ever had before, and now I have this eczema condition, and this is one of the trigger foods. So I thought, well, hold on, maybe this isn't just a trigger food, maybe this is a food that actually causes this. Which I know is pretty strange, because if you go to the American Medical Association website, they actually have a statement there that says food does not cause disease and food cannot be used to treat disease. Only a drug can be used to treat a disease. So I wasn't quite buying that. But then what I did was I said, well, what's common about all these trigger foods? Like there's 4 or 5 of them, the big ones, tomatoes, milk, dairy, cheese, fish, eggs, peanut butter. And so I went to, I think it was the U.S. Department of Agriculture database. I got a list of all the nutritional components that are in each one of these foods. And it's actually maybe 200 compounds kind of per food. I put them into a database and I said, what's common about these foods? And the retinoids, were kind of one of the common components that span these trigger foods, with the exception of peanut butter. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And from there, the next step for me was to say, okay, I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about vitamin A. And so I went to investigate, is it possible to get too much vitamin A? And sure enough, it is. And there's a huge long list of symptoms that can develop if you get too much vitamin A. And I had a really pretty good match between my own personal symptoms and the list of symptoms for vitamin A toxicity. And so at that point in time, I said, well, this is possible. I knew it was really, way out in left field, and it's probably ridiculous. But I thought, well, there's a slight possibility that my condition, my new autoimmune disease, I've just gotten too much vitamin A. And so I decided at that point in time that I would just kind of eliminate it from my diet, and that's what I did.
So this is pretty amazing. I mean, you basically just look at all these foods that are the trigger foods, and then you just throw them in a database and say, just very simplistically, what is common about all these foods? And you say, oh, vitamin A, and from there you're kind of running with that.
Yeah, that's right. So the total time, I think I came home from my doctor kind of by noon, and by 4 o'clock, I come to that possibility, which is so ridiculous. 4 hours of investigation, I've come up with this crazy theory. And I knew it was crazy, and I thought it's just so ridiculous.
It definitely does sound crazy on the front, but just from my investigations looking at health discoveries, sometimes things are found in a very simplistic way, just like this. It's like you cut through all the BS around whatever the issue is, and you just go, oh, look, 1 + 1 = 2. So I mean, I think that's pretty amazing. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's what happened. So from there, I decided, okay, I'm just going to cut out, vitamin A. And I found out, well, that's incredibly difficult to do because it's in nearly every food. It's just so amazing to me that this so-called essential vitamin that's being supplemented in our foods is actually in so many of our foods already. So why are we supplementing? That's whatever. It's kind of a question going through my head. And so for the next 3 weeks, I did absolutely no other research or investigation. I just said, I'm just going to go on this ridiculous diet and see if anything comes of it. And it was just a long shot. And, after 1 week, nothing. After 2 weeks, nothing. After 3 weeks, nothing. No improvement. My condition didn't get any better. But of course, at that time, I'd also experienced kind of really from the fall of 2013 up until this time, kind of early 2014, I had, really quite intense body-wide inflammation. Like, unless you've experienced it, it's hard to kind of describe. But so just kind of inflamed everywhere.
Gotcha.
So then what happened was really quite interesting because I was so close to giving up. I was just so on a coin toss kind of decision. Should I continue with this ridiculous diet or should I stick with it? And I said, I'll stick with it for a few more days. Then what happened was over a period of about 3 days, 3 nights, my symptoms started to rapidly improve. It was quite remarkable because I had joint stiffness and body stiffness for about 10 years. Nothing really too severe, but quite noticeable. And so in that 3-day period, that joint pain and body stiffness evaporated, completely went away. It's never come back. My thinking clarity, vastly improved. And my chronic fatigue had lifted, completely. It was just almost like recovering from a flu kind of
Wow, it's like you came back to life, really.
Yeah. So, but I still had the eczema. I wasn't completely cured by any means in that 3-week period, but it definitely had a big improvement in my health. And it's really kind of strange because, in the middle of the night, I wake up and I'm really feeling, relatively speaking, really good and really quite refreshed, and my chronic fatigue is lifted. And I just said to myself, what the hell was that? That's strange. And it's instantly within a second, the word Alzheimer's popped into my head. I thought, wow, that's, where did that come from? I hadn't been thinking about that. I had no friends with that condition. I knew nobody with that condition. I'm just kind of crazy.
So before we go any further, let's take a step back to when you were doing this research about vitamin A. And one of the interesting things you mentioned in your second book is you kind of give a timeline of how vitamin A was discovered to be a vitamin. Can you kind of walk us through that story and how, vitamin A became a vitamin in the first place?
Sure. So I've got those 3 ebooks. The first one is me kind of documenting this kind of discovery process. But when I was writing the first one, I was fully believing that, yes, it's a vitamin. We've just gotten too much of it. And I personally have overdone it potentially. And that's that. But then from there, I decided, well, I need to find out how it was actually determined that this substance is a vitamin at all. So I went to investigate that. And it was really quite surprising what I found. And that's really kind of the focus of my second ebook, was this discovery process. So what happens is in the late 1800s, kind of at the tail end of the germ theory of disease, with better microscopes and processes they had found, microbes that cause diseases, and there's this Koch's postulates that kind of help, scientists determine if a certain microbe is causing a disease.
Yeah.
But there's another group of diseases that didn't fit that because there was no microbes. And so these would be diseases like, diabetes and eczema and asthma and these types of things. And so there's different researchers kind of around the world, hypothesizing about what could be causing these other diseases if they're clearly not caused by a microbe. And there was a group of people that were thinking, this is caused by some unforeseen toxin that we don't know about. But there's another kind of more powerful group that's saying, no, these diseases are caused by a deficiency, and we just don't know what that deficiency is. And so a group of researchers in Germany were looking at this, and one fellow really kind of stands out. His name was Wilhelm Stepp from Germany, and I think in 1912, 1913, he runs a series of experiments trying to isolate, some fat-soluble component that would be responsible for these diseases or, a disease condition in animals. And he's running these studies on mice. But I found now Stepp is not given the credit for discovering vitamin A. He goes through a series of experiments, actually really quite well thought out experiments, and over a period of years, he's trying to isolate down what is in fat soluble or what's in fats that are so essential for the survival of animals. And goes through this process of trying to isolate it out. He fails. He kind of gives up. But so at the same time in the United States, there's another group of researchers, really kind of headed up by a guy named Elmer McCullum. And he, at the same time, kind of 1912, 1913, he's running his own animal experiments. But there's actually kind of an interesting connection between the STEP experiments and the McCullum experiments. And that's kind of what I got suspicious about was these experiments were using casein as a protein source in the diet.
Okay.
And what happened and so kind of throughout the series of experiments used to identify vitamin A as a vitamin, they use casein in the diet as their source of protein. But what they know is that casein could have vitamin A in it, and it could have fat components in it. So they go through this incredible process of sterilizing and extracting the casein, or extracting all the fat out of the casein with solvents, particularly ether and alcohol.
Okay.
And they heat it and they aerate it, and they really kind of go to town on sterilizing this casein using these diets. And then kind of what happened, so I think 1913 is probably pretty conclusive that there's something in the fat that's essential in the diet. And it was kind of, I guess proposed at that time that this would be vitamin A. Then there's a bit of a break in the research, probably due to the First World War, so in 1914 to 1918. Then there's kind of a resurgence of the research in the early 1920s, 1923. And there's another study done by Lobach.
All right, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, yep, go ahead.
Okay, so just kind of repeat myself just a little bit. So you got Wilhelm Stepp in 1912-13 doing his experiments on trying to isolate a fat-soluble factor in his animals. The interesting thing about the Stepp experiments is that he's routinely killing his animals within 3 weeks, almost across the board. But what's even more interesting is he's killing his animals proportional to the heating time of the casein. So the more he heats and the longer he heats the casein, the more deadly his diet is. And so he doesn't understand that. And he gets perplexed by that. And I think it's kind of one of the factors why he kind of sort of, I'm going to say, gives up. But he does go on and do some follow-on research, but nevertheless. Now, kind of tragically, McCullum and the Americans follow along with that process. They use casein and they heat it, and they feed it to the animals, saying this is a safe source of protein. And likewise, kind of in most of the follow-up studies, they're using casein, heated casein, usually in alcohol, and their animals die.
So just to sum it up, they're basically looking for some kind of fat-soluble thing. They don't know what it is yet, and they're feeding this diet to mice or rats, and they're using casein as the protein source, but they're heating it quite a bit, and they're finding, although they might not be realizing it, that the more they heat this casein, the faster these rats die.
Yes. Now, it's interesting about Stepp's experiments. He doesn't really... he's a good scientist and he documents his procedures and outcomes, but nowhere does he actually make that statement that he says, but if you read his results, you can actually see it. Now, so Stepp was using mice and McCullum was using rats. And so in the McCullum experiments, his animals are usually dying in about 8 to 10 weeks. And other follow-on experiments, these animals die in about 8 to 10 weeks. So you could say, well, the rat is a hardier animal, and the mice were dying sooner just because they're a little bit weaker. But still, something doesn't add up right away there for me, because why would it be proportional to the heating time of the casein to the death rate of these animals? So something didn't fit quite right there for me. The second thing that was really quite shocking to me, or surprising, is all of the symptoms that they produce in these experiments, which are kind of catastrophic head-to-toe destruction of these animals that they attribute to vitamin A deficiency, are actually the perfect textbook description of vitamin A toxicity. So,
interesting.
Yeah, how do we square these two things? It doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it doesn't take long for me to kind of kind of start, connecting the dots on, how could this be? Because I just know from personal experience, you can practically not starve a rat to death in 3 weeks, and never mind have this catastrophic head-to-toe destruction. So something was clearly wrong with these experiments, and nobody has gone back in the medical science to try to investigate this. It's just been accepted. Yes, vitamin A deficiency has been proven in these experiments, particularly the Wolbach and Howe study kind of conclusively seals the deal. The science is done, settled, and let's move on.
So they concluded from this, the rats dying, that they have a deficiency of vitamin A. But you're saying like rats are very hardy animals. They can live, they can starve for quite a while before succumbing to death just from starvation. So the fact that they were dying so quickly just doesn't make sense unless they were being given something. And what you're saying is what they were probably given was large doses of vitamin A, or
it's worse. It's worse.
All right.
So here's the detail, and here's the detail that these scientists in the early 1920s would not and could not have known about. Is there's multiple forms of vitamin A. So when someone says vitamin A, it's really an umbrella term that refers to any molecule that has a vitamin A activity component to it. But the big ones are what's called retinol and the beta carotene precursors that you would have in plants. But then what happens is the active form, what's considered the active form of vitamin A, is called retinoic acid, or in the early research, kind of in the 1960s, it would refer to this as vitamin A acid. And so vitamin A acid, the active form of vitamin A, is actually incredibly toxic, but it's still believed to be a vitamin. So, but the interesting detail, which I've yet to kind of scientifically absolutely prove, but I'm working on it, is the conversion process from vitamin A into retinoic acid or vitamin A acid only requires heat and oxidization. So the process of them heating the heck out of the casein would have taken the vitamin A in that casein, converted it to retinoic acid, and the retinoic acid is what killed these animals so quickly. So even if they had given these animals vitamin A, they wouldn't have died that quickly because, like humans, we are well adapted to consume a reasonable amount of vitamin A. So those animals shouldn't have died that quickly, especially steppe animals dying in 3 weeks. So they had to, in my estimation, they had to have been poisoned to death. And the most likely poison is vitamin A acid because the diets are incredibly restrictive. There's very little in these diets. So just kind of through a process of elimination, say, okay, what could have possibly poisoned these animals to death like this so quickly? And so then, use more modern scientific literature about the symptoms and toxicology of retinoic acid or vitamin A acid, and it's a perfect match. So now we have a perfect match on what could have caused all of these symptoms, vitamin A acid. So my personal theory is that these experiments were botched, and they actually ended up poisoning the animals to death by heating up the casein in the way that they did.
Okay, so basically, if you, if somebody's listening to this and you've heard of vitamin A, they're talking about retinol. And there's also beta carotene, which is, found in carrots. It's that orange color, yellow colorish kind of precursor to vitamin A is what you're saying.
Right.
And what they were doing is they were heating retinol to create it, to make it into retinoic acid.
And this has... So in Step's case, what he was trying to do is he was trying to remove any fat-soluble any fat from the diet. In his strategy, he would, progressively start adding back, these fat-soluble components to try to isolate it down into the one that would sustain life. He didn't get that far because his animals just died. The other studies kind of took a bit of a different approach that said, okay, we're gonna create a diet that has no vitamin A in it and just see what happens to these animals. And so a little bit of a difference in those two approaches, but the end result was the same. Very quick, catastrophic death of these animals, which doesn't make any sense to me. But that's kind of where it is.
Gotcha. So to kind of get back to your story. So you've kind of done this research. You figured out, vitamin A is this main factor. Since then, you've published a post, I think, marking 5 years on a zero vitamin A diet.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about, what are the things you've seen in that journey? What are the things that have been solved in your health? Just kind of give us a little summation of that.
Sure. So I've completely turned around my health, I guess. So as far as I know, I've recovered from chronic kidney disease. I have no sign of that. I've recovered from my adult eczema, which I was told I'd have for the rest of my days. I don't have that. So I'm actually in really good health. Complete major U-turn on my health from where I was
And
5 years ago.
You made it past 51, correct?
No, yes, way past 51. I'll be 60 next spring, so
Okay.
I seem to be doing okay. And just all kinds of, just everything about my health is, vastly improved over that 5-year period. So right now, I think I'm in pretty good health. And so what I did was I thought, okay, this is a really interesting experience, and I wrote that first ebook trying to get some other people interested in this topic, and it's really trying to see if other people would, take on this crazy experiment and apply it to themselves and just report the results. And so very slowly that's been happening. I have a few early adopters, and now it's getting a lot more interest lately.
What does the diet entail, if you don't mind just detailing that real quick?
Sure. Well, my diet is extreme, and I think I should make a distinction here. The purpose of my diet right now is to prove a scientific point. So I'm quite sure of it, I could start introducing vitamin A foods back into my diet, and I think I'd be perfectly fine. So, but I'm personally sticking to a diet that I think has nearly zero vitamin A to prove a scientific point. So my personal diet should not be what other people do. I'm saying it's like,
all right.
I have a specific reason for doing this crazy diet. But my diet is white rice, sometimes brown rice, beef and black beans, and water and salt.
Just those 5 things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
I do. Sometimes I'll have... Yeah, pretty much. Sometimes I'll have an apple every now and then. I'll peel the apple to get down to the white core, so I don't want to eat the red skin. So I'm very, very careful about never knowingly consuming any vitamin A. But there still be traces of vitamin A in the beef that I consume. So it's not absolutely scientifically zero, but it's close enough for my purpose.
Have you ever cheated on this diet in the last 5 years?
Not deliberately. No, I'm really... of this so-called vitamin being a toxin, and I don't want to introduce it into my own situation. And I'm trying really hard to get a blood test that says 0.0 vitamin A levels in my blood serum. And so, I want to achieve that. I want to achieve that and then go for another 5 years and just kind of prove a point. Okay, here, a human can go for, 5 or 10 years with no vitamin A. It's not a vitamin. It's kind of what my ultimate goal is.
Yeah, that would be pretty amazing. I mean, are there social repercussions? I mean, what did your wife say when this was, the plan?
She was, of course, really skeptical. We have, family members that are in healthcare, so they were really dubious. It's quite interesting because they're kind of coming around. My wife is just kind of happy that I'm, back working, bringing home a paycheck, and she's not really too interested in the kind of scientific aspect of this or the repercussions of it scientifically. For us, we can still go out to restaurants. I'll order a steak, and we'll go to a particular restaurant that usually has rice. So I'll order a steak and rice, and I'm fine. Just to make sure that there's no butter or anything else with that. So I don't find it too restrictive, kind of socially.
Okay, that's awesome. So this theory that basically vitamin A, is a toxin, there's obviously, like you said, when you first thought of it, you thought, wow, this is crazy. And so there's a lot of people out there, who say, this is nuts. It gets a lot of criticism. And, the health industry is really full of people saying, this one thing or this one practice is the root of all evil, whether that's glyphosate or mercury or whatever it is.
Yeah.
What do you, what would you say to those kind of criticisms that, this might be a bit of confirmation bias or something like that with vitamin A?
Well, this is a big topic. This is kind of where I might ramble on a bit. This is definitely multifactorial. So this isn't one thing. This is kind of one of many things, and there's kind of lots of actors here. I think the big point that I'm trying to prove that the very determination of this particular molecule being a vitamin is not a vitamin, and there's probably at least 100 studies documenting, proving, without any doubt that vitamin A is a serious toxin. On the flip side, there's probably, I think, again, one meta-analysis, actually about 4,000 studies that's saying, yes, vitamin A is beneficial to human health, and here are all the reasons. Okay. So I'm definitely kind of, going against the status quo, but not entirely, because there's lots of research saying this is a toxin. So the general theory in medical science is, this is only a toxin at a high dose. If you get too much of it, you'll fall into these disease conditions. So not really. Then in the context of it being multifactorial, something you mentioned, glyphosate, is probably a good example. Other examples, so anything that compromises your liver function or compromises your body's ability to deal with vitamin A is going to be a factor. Okay. And so one of the things that I've talked about a lot in my ebooks was about the toxicity side of vitamin A. But there's the opposite side of that, and that's the detoxification process. So your body will go through a natural process of processing and detoxifying vitamin A. And of course, you need enzymes and other components to do that. So yes, we're probably overdoing it on the toxicity side, but we could be depleting the enzymes that are needed on the detoxification side too. So it's not black and white.
Gotcha. So you're basically saying maybe vitamin A is making the detoxification of other chemicals or other, heavy metals or whatever, basically more difficult.
And conversely, so these other things are making the detoxification of vitamin A more difficult. So you need to be careful about, kind of all toxins. So, but this is a big one. I think this is a big one. And the reason that it's such a big one, when I say this one, vitamin A is a big one, because it's been supplemented into our foods, all based on the notion of this is an essential vitamin. And so all of a sudden, kind of from the 1970s, till now, we have this exponential growth rate in disease in North America, and actually through a lot of the world. And so my hypothesis is that the bulk of this is actually caused by vitamin A toxicity. And you kind of really get down into the details of it. You get down into the microbiology aspects of it. This just fits really, really well, because vitamin A will kind of attack the basal membrane or the stem cells throughout the body, head to toe, and has a potential of causing all of these conditions. So, we have means, motive, and opportunity here. So, yeah, and
all right,
yeah, I'll leave it at that, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great explanation. So you mentioned a little bit earlier that you have these people kind of testing out the diet with you. And I know your blog, it has a forum section where people can share their stories of trying this diet. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about the experiences that people are having? Because I think most people who are trying this diet are really curious about the long-term potential risks and benefits, especially given that a lot of people who try this diet initially have a lot of success.
Yes. Okay. So this is another kind of big discussion. Sure. So the results are a bit all over the map. So there's no real conclusive, hey, we're all getting better really quickly. That's not happening. So the general pattern is that people experience significant improvement in their health for the initial period, maybe, 3 weeks to 2 months, they seem to get significantly improved. And then some people actually regress and become significantly worse, and probably even worse off than where they started from. And very surprisingly, some people sail right through that and they don't have that that phase, and their health does generally get better. These are all anecdotes, of course, but I have some mothers who've contacted me saying, you know what, I've recovered my young child from eczema, which is great. I've had other kind of young men, kind of in their mid-20s and 30s, saying, hey, I've been on this diet for 3 to 6 months or a year, and I've recovered my eczema, which is great. And they're not reporting this condition of slipping backwards, but some people are slipping backwards. So it's not all positive.
Gotcha.
But the general trend is over the long term, people are recovering their health, which I think is quite interesting. And lots of people are coming from different backgrounds, but kind of one kind of common theme in the background is that most of these people were supplementing with vitamin A from one source or the other. So very few people are coming and saying, you know what, I've been living on a pretty normal, North American diet, and all of a sudden I'm sick and I'm going to apply this diet. Some, but for the most part, I'm going to say 80% of the people are coming from a background of supplementation.
Gotcha. That's really interesting. So if you could kind of synthesize, all the forum posts and the private emails, is there any numbers you can kind of put on it? Like, maybe 50-50 or, 40% of the people get better, 60%, anything like that?
Sure. My guesstimate is that 80% of the people are getting better over the long term. I would say 20% of the people end up getting worse, but I think it's over the short term, yet to be confirmed. But there are people that have gone through what someone has termed this detox phase. So people adopt the diet, they see an improvement in their health for the first, let's say, 2 months, then they kind of fall off a cliff and get into a state of worse health. And then if they, stick with that, they'll slowly kind of crawl out of that phase and eventually, start to recover their health.
Okay.
And I think there's a few others that have contacted me that have started the diet. I think it just dropped off. It's either not working for them, or they can't stick with it, or I don't know. But the other thing, one of the most kind of interesting things for me is kind of the universal, 80% of people that are reporting are stating that their mental clarity has improved. Their sense of well-being and calmness has improved. Just generally feeling happier. So there's definitely some cognitive improvement that a lot of people are experiencing. And it's so interesting to me because there's teenagers that are reporting that. There's people that are in their 50s and a few people in their 70s.
Wow.
So that's one thing. The second thing is the weight loss. So a lot of people are reporting substantial weight loss. I think one fellow reported substantial weight gain, but I think he was kind of zooming his sugar intake. But so weight loss is pretty darn interesting, and we're talking significant amounts of weight loss in relatively short periods of time.
Yeah, do you want to maybe give just like a couple minutes on why? Because you've written about the obesity connection with vitamin A. Do you want to just give a little bit on that?
Sure. And of course, all of this is just, my own personal theory, I guess, backed up with, some, studies that support these theories. Mm-hmm. So the general theory that I have is that, one, vitamin A, especially the retinoic acid form of the vitamin A, but vitamin A itself is, I think, best described as a potential toxin. So, I don't want to kind of ring the alarm bell saying, oh my God, vitamin A is a toxin, because humans have a big detoxification organ, our liver. We can deal with this on a reasonable basis, and nobody should panic or be concerned. And, it's like, even if this was confirmed, people are still going to be eating vitamin A. It's been with us forever,
forever.
For millions of years. Plants love this molecule. We've just gotten too much of it. So that's kind of that. But so what happens is the real toxicity of vitamin A is when it comes in contact with stem cells. And stem cells are these base cells that all other cells kind of, originate from the human body. And the stem cells are used to kind of maintain your tissue structures. But vitamin A is very toxic to stem cells. It drives them into this perverse state of rapid mitosis and replication. So my theory is that same effect is actually being applied to the stem cells of the adipose tissues. And kind of a sub-theory to that is that the body is naturally storing away more fat to protect your basal membrane from attack from the vitamin A molecule. So this actually would be, if it proves to be true, it would be incredibly brilliant by the body to kind of build this isolation buffer between your basal membrane and the source of vitamin A circulating in serum, saying, oh, you know what, here's this toxic substance. We're going to build this barrier between those stem cells and this toxic substance, and that barrier is the accumulation of adipose fat. But anyway, so people are dropping, significant amounts of weight by just eliminating this vitamin from their diet and actually consuming large amounts of calories. There's people that are saying, they're still on big calorie intake diets and they're losing weight.
Yeah, that was really interesting that I read about. People are consuming 3,000 calories, even more, and they're eating mashed potatoes or rice and meat and beans, and so that's not really falling into the categories that are popular today of like low carbohydrates or high carbohydrates or anything like that. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and that's a bit of a point I wouldn't mind commenting on. I think so. What's happened, kind of my view, is everybody's pretty much disappointed by the results of mainstream medicine, which are, there's nothing that they're going to offer you for these chronic diseases, nothing that's going to cure them anyway. And so you've got this kind of grassroots, citizen-driven research going on in nutrition and diet and medicine. And it's so unfortunate because everyone's kind of, in these camps, but they're focusing on the macronutrients, like, carbohydrates or protein or starches or, sugar. And everyone's kind of got their favorite enemy or the thing that they're trying to promote. And I'm going, hold on, no, it's not about the macronutrients. It's about the molecule. So let's go down to any molecule that could be responsible for these conditions. And you can get that molecule from plant sources or from animal sources. So, that's my rant on that point.
That's great. So in a recent blog post of yours, you talked a little bit about the connection between vitamin A and amyloid plaques.
Right.
And you said, the skin, the kidneys, all these other organs can heal. But, my question is, can the brain heal? And maybe can you go over that a bit? Is there a way to reverse brain aging once, vitamin A has damaged the brain? Theoretically, obviously.
Yeah, obviously, theoretically, I don't know, but I think it's possible for multiple reasons. One is if you start looking at start looking at all of the symptoms, like all the comorbidities with autism. Autism comes with eczema. It comes with spontaneous bone fractures, loss of speech and language skills. Comes with inflamed GI tract. Comes with diabetes. And so all these comorbidities that come with autism, which we identify in young children 3 years of age or less. Then the other end of the age spectrum, we have dementia and Alzheimer's, of course. And it's so fascinating to me because both these diseases in the 1930s were unheard of, like literally, almost unheard of. I think autism was first diagnosed in the 1930s, Alzheimer's in 1906, and when it was first diagnosed, it was an absolute anomaly. Like this is, this one person has lost her cognitive function at age, whatever it was, 70 or something, and that's the genesis of the identification of this disease. And so interesting, in 1970, both of these diseases, both autism and Alzheimer's, had an incidence rate of about 1 in 10,000. I think it was 1 in 100,000.
Wow.
Now today, we're looking at about 1 in 40, 1 in 48 for autism. And in the adults, age 85 group, we're looking at 1 in 2. So we've seen this massive exponential growth rate in both these conditions. Both these conditions have the same comorbidities. Their only difference is the age groups that they're in. Okay, but so back to answering your question, there are lots of mothers that have actually recovered their autistic children on a diet. Now, this completely flies in the face of modern medical science because they want everybody to believe that autism is a genetic condition.
Yeah.
And there's been a massive amount of research trying to implicate genetics in Alzheimer's too, but it's completely like a 10-year-old can see that you cannot have an 800-fold increase in these diseases since 1970 and it to be a genetic condition. It's just ridiculous. So clearly it's an environmental condition. But to answer your question, so you have, I think, really good clinical evidence in these mothers that have recovered their children from autism on a diet. So I think the brain can recover. I do not know, how fast it's going to happen or if it's possible in a senior that's 85 years old. But I'm hopeful. Nobody has reported that as happening yet on this diet, but I'm hopeful.
Okay. What do you think about the glyphosate connection? Because I know Garrett Smith, I think you know him. He's a big proponent of the low vitamin A diet online, and he puts a lot of the blame for all this on glyphosate, basically saying, it and I know you mentioned a little bit earlier, but what do you think about that? I mean, if glyphosate wasn't in the picture, would this all just be like, hey, vitamin A is fine?
No, I don't think vitamin A would be fine. I think it would still be a huge problem. I think it's exasperating the problem. I haven't really looked into glyphosate too much, so I think Garrett's probably right. I don't, vitamin A toxicity does not at all need glyphosate to activate itself because we've got lots of research from the 1920s and 30s and well before the introduction of glyphosate that you can get into these conditions on a vitamin A toxicity kind of scenario. But I think he's right. And I think the glyphosate thing is so important, kind of outside of this discussion. But, people should, as citizens, we should not put up with this crap in our food.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I know we only got about 10 minutes here, so I just want to get a few more questions in. There's a Dr. Coimbra, who's down in South America, I believe, treating people with MS with high doses of vitamin D. So that's another, somebody who's focusing on autoimmune disease. Would you say this diet's kind of a variation on that? Or do you think they're connected in any way?
Well, I think they are connected because the same cellular receptor that binds with vitamin A binds for vitamin D. So if you have sufficient amount of vitamin D, it'd be an antagonist to vitamin A, and would block the vitamin A from getting into the cell and causing its damage. And but that's pretty much all I really know about it. I haven't really kind of focused on vitamin D. I'm not concerned so much about vitamin D because the body produces it naturally. But it's not an antidote to vitamin A. It might be a sensible thing to take when you go on a low vitamin A diet.
Okay.
But I don't know. I'm not an expert on it.
Gotcha. Well, that's interesting that vitamin D could potentially block, vitamin A.
Yeah, that's well documented. That's not speculation. That's a fact.
Okay, cool. So is there anything, if somebody decides to do this, if they have autoimmune disease or maybe they've been eating a bunch of liver or supplementing retinol, if they decide to do this, obviously the avoidance of vitamin A is the main aspect, but are there proactive things? Are there drugs? Are there supplements, that people can do to, I don't know, kind of get along on this journey? Or, what have you heard?
No, well, most certainly no drugs and no supplements. I know some people have tried vitamin D with a negative result. Some people have had a positive result. So one of the things that people have to be aware of, and this is actually backed up in studies, when you go down to like a zero intake of vitamin A, what happens is kind of counterintuitively, the body actually starts releasing more vitamin A from the liver, and your vitamin A serum levels will go up.
Wow.
So, yeah, so and that's probably the reason some of these people are going into this detox phase, and they're getting significantly worse in their state of health. So that's something to be on the lookout for. Obviously we need an antidote or some factor that would work as an antidote. We haven't identified that. Nobody has yet. So there's no magic solution. And unfortunately, this diet is so slow to see results that, you have to stick with it for a long time. It's not a magic solution. This is a long haul.
Yeah. Okay. so in your kind of ideal world, where does this lead? Because you've been doing 5 years now without vitamin A. I mean, that's pretty amazing just on the front. I mean, that kind of just backs up a lot of what you're saying. But where does this research and discovery lead to? What kind of changes do you want to see in the world?
Well, yeah. So what I would love to do is, one, I'd love to actually prove that vitamin A is not a vitamin. And the way to do that is to disqualify those early experiments. And we're actually working on that scientifically. I am working with some scientific academic scientists on this, so that's some good support. So that's my first thing, is to prove that vitamin A is not a vitamin. And then once we have that, then you can say, okay, the easiest thing to do would turn off the injection pumps at all the dairy producers, like pie in the sky. That's not going to happen. But if I could wave a magic wand, stop all the supplementation of vitamin A into sugar and MSG and into the breakfast cereals and flours, that would be so great.
Yeah, didn't you write somewhere that they're putting vitamin A in sugar? What was that?
They do. So in South America, and South America is kind of the southern hemisphere. A lot of people don't have milk, probably due to lack of refrigeration. So the powers that be decided to supplement sugar in the southern hemisphere. I think there's about 100 countries that happens in. And so, and so now we have 350 million people with diabetes around the world. I think there's a connection.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So you'd want to see it getting out. Basically, you want vitamin A out of the food, system.
Well, any supplemented vitamin A. And then we can go back to kind of where we were in the 1950s and 60s, and people were really quite healthy. It's kind of crazy. We were much healthier back then, kind of on a statistical basis. And so, I'm not anti-vitamin A. The body is well equipped to deal with it. We just shouldn't be supplementing it with it. We shouldn't be overdoing it. And then if you have an autoimmune disease, you go into your doctor, you can say, oh, we know what causes this, and therefore we can properly treat it. That would be great.
Gotcha. So you have several books. You have a blog. Do you want to kind of detail where people can find you and where they can read about this?
Sure. So my blog is ggenereux.blog. So it's GGENEREUX.blog. My 3 ebooks are there. They're free. And I'm really just trying to, spread the word, get more people interested in this, with the motivation of trying to get more people to participate in this experiment. That's about it.
All right.
This is a side project for me. This is not my my full-time gig by any means, and but I'm going to see it through to the end. I'm going to I'm not going to stop until I get some sort of conclusion on it.
Yeah. Is there anything coming up for you? Are there any books coming out? Anything like that?
Probably not. As I mentioned, I'm working with some other researchers now to kind of definitively prove that these experiments in the early 1900s were indeed what we suspect they were. If we can get that, I think that'll be a big deal. We'll kind of take it from there.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much all the questions I have. Is there anything else that maybe I didn't touch on, or that you want to just make sure that the audience, knows about this whole thing before we sign off?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll take just a minute or two to kind of explain something like that. It's really in kind of both my ebooks. I was trying to explain this, and I don't know if I got it across very well.
Okay.
And that is, when I look at this, I have no background in medicine or no interest in the health sector. But when I look at this, I look at it just like any other scientific problem. This is not, just because it happens in health doesn't mean that you have to be an expert in health to solve this problem. This is just another problem. And what was so shocking to me was the exponential growth rates of these diseases. And they're kind of in lockstep. You take diabetes, asthma, autism, Alzheimer's, dementia, heart disease, stroke. It's just exponential growth.
Yes.
And so if you read the medical literature, a lot of times they'll say, this is clearly reflecting some environmental factor. And almost always they will join that with a genetic predisposition plus environmental factors. Well, we can drop the genetic predisposition, instantly. That's just a distraction. That's nonsense. And so, okay, these diseases are caused by the environment. crystal clear. I don't think anybody can legitimately argue these are not environmentally caused diseases. And then, from there, I use the term, let's drop this vagueness of environmental factor, because that's a million things, and let's just call them, for what they are. They're poison. So this is a long-term poison. This is not something that's going to poison you in a day or a week. It's going to take, decades to poison. But these diseases are indeed poisonous. So from there, you could say, here's this crazy Grant guy with this theory about vitamin A. Might be right, might be wrong. Let's say he's wrong. Let's say I'm wrong about that. And let's say it's glyphosate plus 3 other things in our environment. I'm kind of like, who cares? Who cares what it is?
You broke up a little bit there. You said glyphosate plus what?
Well, some other factors. It could be a combination of things. It might not be one thing.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Now, but my point is, we know that these diseases are poison. There's just no question about it. I don't know, you can argue, but I don't think you can. But scientifically, these are poisons.
Yeah.
So then the net from that is, okay, how about we reduce our diet to something so basic, something so simple that removes almost all possible toxins, like rice and beef have been proven to be safe for rice for 5,000 years in India and China. Beef, maybe pluses and minuses. But if you go to a really, really super simple diet that would eliminate environmental toxins as best you can, then you should see a recovery in your health. And whether it's vitamin A or not, doesn't really matter, because the ultimate goal is for people to recover their health. So I think if people recognize that these diseases are indeed a poisoning, then go to a diet that is super simple, but of course substantial enough to sustain good health, then I think people will recover their health.
All right. Yeah, that's a good summary.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks so much for coming on and doing this. This has just been awesome. A lot of the things you mentioned in the call about having that first few months of real benefit where your health is just amazing, and then kind of going into a detox. I've experienced all that, and I'm sticking with it as well. And it's a very interesting journey. So thank you so much.
Oh, okay, thank you. Great.
We'll see you.
See you. Bye.
I really enjoyed this interview with Grant. I wanted to highlight a few things before signing off. So first, Grant gave some estimated anecdotal stats about people who follow this diet. I think about 80% of people over the long term get some positive results, with maybe 20% experiencing some short-term problems and possibly being unable to continue. So he also made it very clear that most of the people who are getting results have supplemented with vitamin A in the past. So for some, this comes from getting involved with Western price diets, maybe eating a lot of liver. And for others, this could come from doing some type of vegan diet, eating a lot of greens and greens powders. Maybe Accutane is a factor, like for me as a kid, or maybe supplemental vitamin A for some other medical reason. Just in some way, they got vitamin A in higher doses in the past. Now, one thing I wish we touched on more was just how many foods are fortified with vitamin A these days. We mentioned sugar being one in Mexico and South America. Dairy products are also fortified, and there are programs around the world to give people supplemental vitamin A under the guise of philanthropy. Grant details this in his second book, and it's pretty horrifying. What I really liked was his version for the world of getting rid of all the vitamin A added to our diet. And then, if you have an autoimmune condition, well, we know how to help you. We also didn't touch on it too much, but the other group of people that may be helped by this are people who can't lose weight. So if you've tried low carb or keto or whatever, and you just can't lose weight, a low vitamin A diet could give some drastic results without you having to lower the amount of calories you are eating. I mean, there are reports online right now of people eating over 3,000 calories per day of meat, rice, and beans, and still losing weight. I mean, that's pretty amazing if you ask me, and if you're desperate enough, I guess. But the biggest takeaway from this interview is that there is hope for people with autoimmune conditions. So lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, eczema, all of these may have this common cause of vitamin A overload, and you could get relief by cutting it out. Now, even if it's just a comorbidity like depression, which is much higher in type 1 diabetics, this is an amazing thing. Also, I was astounded when he mentioned that autism and Alzheimer's both had the same comorbidities and exponential rise in our population. The only thing separating them was the age of onset. I think that deserves a lot more research. So I'm linking to Grant's stuff in the show notes. If this diet seems too restrictive to you, I'm also linking to an article that details a low vitamin A diet that's not as strict as what Grant's doing, meaning there are some foods like apples, strawberries, cauliflower. These have small amounts of vitamin A, and they can be included in a they can be included in a low vitamin A diet, but not necessarily a no vitamin A diet. I'm also linking to the audio version of his second book on YouTube. In my opinion, his second book is very approachable. It's on YouTube being read by a guy who has a nice accent, so it makes it really easy to get through. So I really hope you enjoyed the interview. If you do have more questions for Grant, you can read his blog posts and go post on his forums located on his blog, or send them over to me at quaxpodcast@gmail.com. And if I get enough of them, maybe we can set up another interview with Grant to get those questions answered. So thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week, and be well.